Hi, I'm Urmi Desai, editor of Move Smartly, and this is a Move Smartly show. And we are back with probably one of our most popular segments, our monthly roundtable, where we talk to my co-host John Pasalis of Realosophy Realty here in Toronto. Hi, John.
Hello again.
And of course, our favorite guest, Steve Saretsky of Oakwin Realty out in Vancouver. Hi, Steve.
Good to be back on the best show.
And just a note for all our listeners and viewers, we're recording early today. We're recording on August 1st. That is because John is doing his part for the Canadian economy. He is going to go camping in the deep Ontario interior for a week. And don't worry, if we don't hear back from him, we will send the police.
I think we'll be fine. I think we'll be fine.
It's been a good show. It's been a good run.
Yeah.
All right. So let's start with our regular market updates. Who wants to go first?
John, take it away.
All right. So market updates. Interesting. I'd say slight shift in the market. I mean, I actually talked about this, I think on our live, maybe on last show, but for sure on the live update I do with the market stats of Toronto, where I kind of talked about how we're starting to feel like things are getting busier. Wasn't sure if it's just our business or the market, but things have picked up a little bit. I mean, again, it's not a booming market, but we're coming off of these terrible lows. So if we look at low rise home sales, for example, like for 3 years in a row, they were in the 3,000 to 3,300 home sales per month for the month of July. This month we're closer to 3,900, so we're actually up like 16%. So a slight increase in the number of transactions. Condo sales up maybe 5%, so not as big of a lift there. But I mean, again, this doesn't mean it's a booming market. Prices are actually down year over year. Houses down about 6%, condos down, I think it's around 9% year over year. So, I think the people that are jumping in are, trying to be a little bit opportunistic, try to find value. So not to say that, it's a booming market, but again, we're coming off of markets that had 20 plus year lows in sales volumes, and we're inching back up a little bit again. So we're seeing that on the ground. We're seeing that in the data. And I have a feeling it's going to continue into September. I mean, again, we've had more people who usually reach out to us July, August, usually are people who want to get active in September. Some are actually getting active in the summer, but many are looking at getting started in the September fall season. So that's kind of what I'm seeing, kind of both in the data and on the ground. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I put that out on Twitter, that things were picking up, more showings, more offers, and obviously got
You got trolls.
yeah, I got destroyed for that comment. But I mean, that's what we're seeing. I think like the important distinction here is everybody always like, oh, show us the data, show me the data, where's your sales, and I think the important thing is like data by nature, it lags. I mean, data, the ability to report data has to have already happened and able to report it. So data will lag. And I think when you get these sort of like turning points, I'm not necessarily saying we were at a turning point, but when you get things that start to turn, usually it's a lot of anecdotal first, and then the data will sort of roll in afterwards. And so like what we've seen in our own business is like, yeah, all of a sudden, like a lot of our listings that were slow, hardly any showings, phones are quiet. All of a sudden you start getting a whole bunch of showings. All of a sudden listings that have been sitting in the market for 2.5 months are getting offers. And you're like, okay, well, is it just our business? And you start having conversations with colleagues in the industry that are reporting the same thing. So that's kind of like how I would sort of quantify the current market today. And again, I think just to preface, it's been, call it a month where we've seen a noticeable uptick. And it's a noticeable uptick from like dead quiet, slow. It's been a horrible year for real estate. Everybody knows that. So we're picking up off the lows. Really shouldn't be a surprise when you have 20-year lows for many months this year that you're getting an uptick. It should not be a surprise to most people. Now, 1 month doesn't necessarily make a trend. I'm not saying that we're all of a sudden in a bull market here and, August is going to be better and September is going to be even better and prices are going to start going up. I think what we're seeing is more sales, more activity, albeit at lower prices. I think what's happened is inventory that's been sitting now for, call it 3+ months, sellers are having to reduce because it's time to move on. And I think these price reductions have enticed a number of buyers back into the market where, again, now we're seeing offers happening. And just to clarify, because if you look at the stats for Greater Vancouver, it's funny what you're actually going to see is you're going to see sales on a year over year basis. We're actually down year over year by like about 1%. And so people are saying, well, if you actually look at the 2024 numbers, they weren't that bad. But what's interesting to note is that sales have been rising month over month, basically in a straight line since January. And so it's pretty uncommon to see sales up month over month from June heading into July, because July, August are typically your slowest times of the year, or one of the slowest, as people go on summer holidays and sort of check out. So you're going to see that. I think the other thing, what you're going to see is when I talk about data lagging, is you have to keep in mind the market that we're in today. The market that we're in today is a market where every offer that comes in with a week minimum of subjects, and in many cases, 2 weeks of subjects. And in some cases, you're seeing a lot of subject to sale offers coming in.
And we would call that condition. So on conditions, so the return of the conditions.
The return of the conditions, right? Yeah. So what I'm saying is, like, if you and I, you decide to buy my house in the middle of July, but you have a 4-week subject to sale of your property, that's not going to show up as a sale until August, even though the transaction, you and I agreed on the price and terms in July. So that's why I say, like, when the data lags, I think that's particularly the case today when you have a lot of these offers with longer condition periods.
So, John, certainly not the return of bidding wars and no condition offers.
No, definitely. And I mean, and to expand on what Steve's talking about, and he's 100% correct, that the data does lag and in terms of the concrete data. But I mean, at least from my perspective, I think this is probably one of the reasons I would imagine people watch the show, because I think we talk about things that are happening before it's in the news, before it's in the headlines. Again, when we talk about things picking up, we talk about like when our phones are ringing, when clients want to meet up with us, when they want to buy in the fall, when they want to sell. And as Steve said, when our listings have been sitting there, all of a sudden are selling quickly, getting showings, more frequently. So this is sort of the softer data that we look at, that we kind of talk about. And as Steve said, it doesn't mean we're returning to a bull market, but it definitely feels a little busier than it did, even 3 months ago. And again, I have a feeling that's going to continue into the fall. But again, by continuing, if you're a seller, I don't mean prices are going to be up 5% by October. Like, it's just going to be a little bit more active. You know what I mean? But I don't think we're getting back to 10 offers on homes this fall.
Sean, I think what you should add there is basically like how I'd sort of quantify is like there's some liquidity returning to the market. Like, I think there was a period of time in, like, I don't know if I'd say like April, May, but there was probably a good 8-week period there at least where it felt like there was like literally like zero liquidity. It's like, even if you wanted to sell and you hammered your price, you still might not get a bid. I think today now where it's like, okay, now when you actually like do a meaningful price reduction, there actually is someone willing to step up and make an offer. And so I think like liquidity has improved significantly in the last, call it 4 to 5 weeks.
And I'm gonna actually add one thing. I mean, at least from my perspective in Toronto, I think I'm seeing that more in low rise than in condos. Condos, even though technically I said sales are up 5%, like, it still feels a little bit more sluggish than houses.
Yeah, it's a same thing here.
And condo prices?
Also down. I mean, I think in Toronto, down 9% year over year, which is, pretty meaningful.
And I'm going to return to a common theme here. John, what is happening with all these small condos hitting the market? Is it the small micro condos, or let's just say 600 and smaller? I mean, that doesn't sound micro to us, but it's hard. Like, the minute you try to put another person in there, and at the prices where you almost need 2 people's income, is that the segment dragging the prices down, or what's happening?
That's a good question. I mean, I haven't looked at the stats to see sort of by size which ones are hit, but are feeling a bigger hit in price. But certainly, I would say the smaller condos are getting less activity, like fewer showings. there's just like not as much demand. Like you said, if you're in the 500s a square foot, it's a tight space for two people, right? You need, if you have one income, is that what you want to buy for the long term? So, and the investor bid's gone. So these units are certainly harder to sell, and they're sitting on the market a little bit longer. And the larger ones are definitely moving a fair bit better.
And do you see any difference between newer units and existing units? Um, so, the resale market's kind of interesting because it captures when a new building is completed and goes right onto the market.
Mhm.
But it also captures the sale of older buildings as well.
I haven't looked at that in terms of like newly completed buildings. A lot of newly completed buildings, the most of the units end up getting leased.
Right.
And what I've seen over the past little while is a lot of the newly completed buildings have have prices that are unrealistic because again, the buyers paid very high prices and then just aren't selling or aren't clearing in many buildings.
Do you find that because there was that boom of all these temporary students and that real hockey stick
Mhm.
population jump, are these buildings going up in areas where the rents just aren't supported, like that, without the investors in there and that crowd renting it,
The
you know?
so I mean they're like the buildings are going up all across the GTA. Like we're
Mhm.
seeing a ton in the 905 in downtown. The challenge again is like the investor math doesn't work. Rents are soft and falling. A lot of places are vacant for a while. Interest rates are too high based on what you're earning, and the price is too high. Like, and we got to keep in mind, like, the math didn't really work 5 years ago either. Okay, you're cash flow negative. You're still losing 600-700 bucks a month 5 years ago. But 5 years ago, no one cared because their condo was going up 60 grand a year, right? So to be short on your cash flow didn't seem like such a bad idea when condo prices are going up 7-8% per year. But when you take out this idea that prices will keep rising, well, all of a sudden, no one wants to be an investor, right? All those Toronto Life articles about, people buying 10 condos and sitting on them and making so much money, those are all gone, right? In an environment where prices have declined and they're unlikely to appreciate very much anytime soon.
Steve, I know the condo story is a little smaller in Vancouver, but I'm wondering whether that still is a story there of falling prices in the condo sector.
Unleash the foreign buyers.
Oh no.
Yeah, the condo. Yeah, I mean, like
How
I said, I
how
think.
our morals have changed.
Yeah, we'll get into that. I think. Yeah, like I said, as I mentioned, I think like you're seeing more sales, albeit at lower prices. So I just think people are adjusting to the reality. Condo prices are down. Again, it's hard to like. I think the market's been pretty illiquid, and I think it's hard to really say, oh, okay, how much are they down? Like if you look at the median sales price of a condo, it's down 4% year over year. The average price per square foot also down 4%. I mean, from last year, in my opinion, it's more than that. Um, Honestly, I feel like it's probably somewhere between 7 or 8. So probably double what's actually being reported. And this is the issue with like stats and data. It's like they're very good for giving you like indicators and overall direction, but it's really hard when you're in this like rapidly evolving dynamic market. I mean, it's really touch and go. And there's segments of the market like this is where I think is where we're seeing today. Specifically, it's very neighborhood specific, where you're seeing extreme pockets of weakness and other pockets that are honestly holding up just fine. So I'll give you like an example. Like if we think of where all the developers have been building, they've been building in places like Burnaby and in Surrey. The amount of new construction towers that are completing. I mean, you've got all-time record high inventory there for sale, which is obviously pushing downwards pressure on prices. Now, if you go into Kitsilano, where everybody wants to live, 3 minutes from the beach, I mean, the prices have held up. The prices really haven't really even moved. And so I think that's where I think in this kind of market, it's hard to paint the broad strokes, but new construction's taking a beating just because the price gap between resale, like as the resale prices keep coming down, I mean, developers only have so much room where they can maneuver before the project becomes unviable or there's no profit to be made. So developers are very reluctant to drop prices. And so I think the gap between resale and new construction continues to widen. I think that's ultimately why we're seeing this cry now from developers for the government to intervene.
We'll return to that in a second. Just before we move away from this topic, the Bank of Canada, we were talking about interest rates, held its overnight policy rate at 2.75, I believe, and indicated cuts may be coming. Now, I usually ask, how is this going to impact the market? But I want to ask something a bit different this time, which is, how does this affect your clients? Do buyers really, are they very sensitive to this kind of news? Obviously, Canada has a lot of other economic uncertainty at this time as well. So, but I'm wondering, like, do your clients, react?
I
John?
think, I mean, I'd say one of the things that I see most often are sellers expecting the markets to react is the thing that I hear most often. Sellers talking about, well, maybe we should list after the next rate announcement. Hopefully they lower rates. Hopefully the market will accelerate, right? And we try to explain to them it's not happening. Like, it's not happening. Like, even if the Bank of Canada cut by a quarter point, doesn't really matter. Like, it's not rates aren't low enough to stimulate demand. Fixed rates have been going up a little bit. So there's just not going to happen. These small changes are not going to stimulate demand. There's too much uncertainty. So no, I don't think it matters to the market, but certainly I think some sellers have this expectation. Again, I think maybe this is just like people are used to previous cycles where you drop rates, the market explodes. Do you know what I mean? Like that happened during COVID. And I think people are hoping that's going to happen again, but rates aren't going to zero again anytime soon. So we're going to stay in this slightly elevated interest rate environment for some time. So I don't think it's going to make a huge difference.
Yeah,
Steve?
I think, yeah, I mean, that's what I've been trying to emphasize to clients like all year, right? Is everyone's like, oh, rate cut this and it's going to change the market. And it's like, the reality is most Canadian borrowers are borrowing on a fixed rate mortgage. And the 5-year bond yield, which prices all these mortgages essentially, it's basically exactly where it was at the start of the year. So like bond yields have been range bound pretty much all year. It's interesting, like if you look at like what's happening in the mortgage market, people talk about like the mortgage renewal wall and interest rates and the Bank of Canada. If you're like looking for a mortgage today, if you got a mortgage that's renewing today, the difference between, let's say, a 3-year mortgage, a 5-year mortgage, and a variable rate mortgage is basically, call it 10 basis points. So like I'll tell you from what we're seeing from our clients, 3-year fixed, good lender, 4%. 5-year fixed, 4.15. Variable, 4.25. So like there's really no difference. It's basically just like, well, which one do you want? Do you want the 3-year? Do you want the 5-year? Do you want the variable? They're all pretty much within 10 basis points. Even if the Bank of Canada had cut this week, that'd bring your variable down to maybe let's call it 4%, which is where your 3-year is. So like it's just I mean, the talk at this point for the BOC to cut 25 basis points, I mean, it's not going to do anything.
Very interesting. So, on to another question then about I'm curious about your consumer sentiment or your client sentiment. It is August 1st, and we had hoped that Canada and the US would have arrived at its new trade deal. We were supposed to renegotiate and hopefully get something in place. Not going to happen. And instead, we're getting an announcement that President Trump is going to introduce 35% tariffs across the board on Canadian goods. Now, it's a bit unclear whether this is on everything outside of UMSCA. Love that name. Our existing trade agreement, which Trump himself negotiated but thinks is terrible. So that's the one that he's trying to set aside. But so there's a little bit confusion on what the impact on the economy will be. But when you look at the UK Guardian headlines, New York Times, all you see is Canada being hammered by a 35% across the board rate hike. Tariff hit. How do your buyers and sellers respond to that? Or your buyers especially, is there still, just tremendous uncertainty?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are concerned again. I think, and we talked about that. I mean, at the top of the show when we're recording, because quite honestly, within 2 days, all of this, I mean, there could be another tariff announcement from Trump. So we don't know when things are going to change. But I actually think I think part of like I think there's like, I think people, I mean, at least from what I'm seeing, I think people are just getting a little bit desensitized to all of this insanity. Like every day it's something new. Every day it's a new tariff. Like what happened to the tariffs on foreign films? That was big news and then kind of quieted down. And and it just feels like this is a negotiating tactic to try to get what he wants. I mean, if you look at sort of the trade deals he's negotiated, apparently with like Japan and the EU, they're obviously scaled down much lower tariffs. And to your point, as people hear what's going on, yeah, I mean, from everyone that I'm reading, it's not 35% on everything, which is, I think, what people originally thought. You know what I mean? Like when all of these announcements came out, yeah, if you think all of our exports are going to get hammered with 30% tariffs, that's significant. But when it's only this sliver of goods that are not under the existing trade agreement, it's obviously a lot smaller. Not to say it's not meaningful, because obviously it can impact a lot of sectors. But yeah, I think people are just like, whatever. Like,
There's
you know
a, and
what I
I
mean?
should, yeah, I
I
should
mean,
say, John, there's confusion, right? Because there's still that 30% on
on
steel. Like,
steel and aluminum,
so
yeah, or the 50 on aluminum.
we're
I don't even
not
know. Like,
sure what's in place and what's not. I would not want a job, one of my old jobs, to figure out what the active tariff rate would be right now. Um,
I think
Steve, sorry,
I
John?
think just to wrap up, I think I'll just say, like, I think yes, it all still matters. I don't think it is changing very much. Like I think
Mhm.
people are just still operating under this uncertainty. And quite frankly, they're looking at what's going on in the US and looking at what's going on in Canada, and the economies aren't tanking despite the tariffs, which
Mm,
is also giving people now again, these are short-term dynamics.
mhm.
We'll have to see how it all plays out. But again, I think people are just operating under this cloud of uncertainty. And I think people who are just very anxious, who work in sectors that might be hit economically, yeah, maybe are still sitting on the sidelines.
Mhm.
But I think that initial shock that we had like earlier in this year, and I think that's kind of in some ways reflected in the data. When we see kind of people jumping back in the market now, people are like, okay, it is what it is. Like, whatever, something will get sorted out. They're crazy, and they're just operating under this assumption that things are going to be a little bit volatile. That's kind of
Yeah.
what I'm finding.
Steve, you mentioned you had a client, I think, a couple of months ago that was worried about that film tariff.
Mhm.
What is the sentiment now amongst your clients when they hear this 35 headline?
I think John said it best. I think it's desensitized, right? I mean, it's like obviously people are still talking about it, thinking about it, but like think about it as today compared to like when the initial announcement was made back in what, February?
Hmm.
I mean, it's dramatically different. I wouldn't say people have tuned it out, but like, and this is kind of what I've been arguing for quite some time is like the market has mostly been frozen and sucking wind because of like the tariff stuff. And my argument has been that eventually people are going to get over it because you have to. He's going to be in power for the next 3.5 years, and like people are just going to have to accept reality and move on. And eventually you become sort of desensitized to the news. And so maybe that's why we're starting to see an uptick in sales volumes. Um, but that's kind of the overarching theme. Obviously, to John's point, like there's certain industries and sectors that are going to be impacted. But the Bank of Canada put out a report yesterday, 2 days ago, saying 95% of all goods are exempt through USMCA.
I like that you're not
Kuzma, or
calling
whatever
it
you want to call
UNSCA.
it. Pick your poison. Uh, so yeah, I don't know. I think that obviously it matters. I think that some people are still worried about job prospects, and I have talked about this before. I think a lot of the fear over job prospects, honestly, I think is actually a lot of it is AI.
Well,
Yeah.
it is true. And we do see, and John, I know you just recorded, I don't know if it dropped yet, an economic discussion with Robert.
Yeah, that dropped today. Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
today, a
What was
week
that like?
after, a week before this recording comes out.
And just remind me his last
Robert
Kavchik,
Kavchik from BMO.
Kavchik of
Yeah,
BMO.
he's good. He's
Yeah,
very
he's
Yes,
good.
yeah,
he's
he's
great. And John, did you want to just, I'm wondering what you picked up on that. The employment numbers are not looking great. There is uncertainty, but is Robert's view that this is happening in certain sectors and this isn't a widespread issue right now?
Yeah, yeah, kind of. Again, I don't think he was overly bearish. I mean, on
Mhm.
housing, I mean, he's kind of talked about something that we said, been talking about on the show, and Steve's talked about like that the outlook is likely that the market is grinding sideways for quite a while, you know? And one thing he said that we've also talked about, I asked him specifically because people ask this a lot. I said, listen, is it possible that houses and condos might do two kind of different things or progress in different ways, right? Because we're underbuilding houses, we have a ton of micro condos. Are we going to see a market where maybe houses do a little bit better or rebound slightly, whereas condos are slow? And he's like 100%, very possible, very likely. So, yeah. So I think again, I think with respect to sort of all the economic news, the message is again the signals are mixed. I think that the tariff shocks are not going to be as significant economically as people were originally worried about. So, and we'll just see how the market kind of plays out. But yeah.
All right. And Steve, you've mentioned one of the big concerns you've been tracking is the slowdown in the new starts. So that's the construction sector, residential just taking a hammering now, complete standstill. I think right after we spoke last month, the premier of your province, not the premier, sorry, the housing minister, and I'm just going to click over to make sure I read his announcement correctly. Your Housing and Municipal Affairs Minister, Ravi Kahlon, announced on July 2nd that BC is reducing the initial cost for developers to help large projects get off the ground. And this measure would be altering the development cost charge collection on large projects. So 75% of the fee will not be due until occupancy. Steve, I know that you've been tracking this. Does this measure help? Does it make an
Not really.
impact?
It's making minor tweaks around the fringes to keep, a couple projects moving forward, but like the broad sort of trend and theme is fewer and fewer housing starts. But like I said, this will keep the odd project that was maybe on the cusp. It might get a couple of those across the finish line. But in general, I think the trend is basically the condo market is not great. The resale market is seeing falling prices, and the cost of new condos was already expensive, and they're looking even more expensive today because they're not adjusting as quickly as the resale prices are. And so, like I said at the beginning of the show, you have this larger and larger the gap between the cost of new housing and resale housing is just widening, where it just makes the optics of like a pre-sale unit look so unattractive. And I think people were willing to accept that gap in a bull market where they felt, hey, in 3.5 years when the project's delivered and completed, the market will have risen another 10%, 15%, and I'll be making some money. And today, the view is like, listen, you're charging me 10, 15% above the resale price, and arguably prices are moving lower, not higher. So why would I tie my money up? So I just think that just kills the whole marketability of these pre-sale units. And like I said, I don't think that's changing in the next 12 months, even probably the next 18 months. And so that model is effectively dead.
And John, you're going to talk a little bit more. I think we're going to do a deeper dive on this soon. But what's interesting is the federal government assistance and all the measures really seem to be geared towards more rental housing increases, with nothing like big happening about this new construction angle. What are you thinking this means for home ownership? I know you've always been a bit critical of the argument that we could build fast enough, but now we've just built nothing. Like we're heading into a era where we'll build nothing. And I wonder what you think about the measures.
I mean, we are building stuff. We're not building condos because that was all driven by hot air and speculation. Like people were paying 40% more for a new pre-construction condo than what an existing newly completed condo just sold for across the street. Like that was the premium in Toronto, about 40%, maybe 30 if you're lucky.
That's
And
crazy.
people paid. Isn't that crazy? Like it's like any like I ask any rational person. A lot of people who I know work in the construction industry. Like, would you buy this? Everyone's like, "Are you crazy? This is
Yes,
insane."
a lot of
Like
people that a lot of our guests would say,
off the
no,
record, they're
yeah,
like, "It's
I would not
insanity."
buy
Like, people who work in the industry, but you had all these investors who thought it was a get rich quick scheme. And of course, you had a 30-40% premium back then. Now resale prices have fallen 20%, and you have this massive gap and it can't be filled. So yeah, we're not going to be building condominiums anytime soon. And yeah, everything that the federal government is doing is just all about rental housing, which is a good thing. We haven't done anything for rental housing for like 30 years, which is why we had these micro condos, quite frankly. But again, I think there's a huge gap there. Anyone who wants to own a home, it's going to keep getting harder. And quite frankly, listen, like I think I'm all for the multiplexes, but you got to appreciate every home that's bought and converted to a 5 or 6 unit apartment building again is lowering the stock of homes that can be bought. Like, you know what I mean? And not that home ownership I think is the only way forward, but certainly I think for a lot of Canadians it is a big part of, you know, being Canadian. We've seen the data. A lot of people leave cities when they can't afford a home of their own. And I do think it's a massive problem. I mean, quite frankly, even if the provinces or the cities found a way to make these multiplexes work as sort of owner occupied homes, I think even that would be better, but they're not. They're all basically only working financially because they're getting all of these government incentives, no HST, rock bottom interest rates to build them through CMHC. So they work as rental properties, but they're not really working and being built as condominiums for small condos and multiplexes for the next generation. I think that's a bit of a problem, but again, that's what our government's focus is right now, rental housing. So
The
we'll
only thing
see.
is, I think, John, I look at the rental housing side, is that like if you just continue to build like lots of rental, let's just say you have like let's say you get to the point where you actually have like a healthy rental market and like rents are like very stable and you have like relatively reasonable occupancy rates. I think that takes off a lot of the pressure from people to buy.
Hmm.
Right? Like a lot of the conversation I heard, like especially during the pandemic, was like, "Oh my God, like prices keep going up. Rents are skyrocketing. Obviously, we had record immigration, so rents are skyrocketing, and I keep getting kicked out of my rental property every 12 months because my landlord wants to sell because he's seeing the price." So I just feel like if you have like stable rents and you have a lot of like long-term secured, purpose-built rental units where people know they have safe tenure in a rental apartment, they're probably less inclined to go out there and then buy. And so I think ultimately that should take some pressure off, your future. I also look at it as like, okay, if I'm a condo investor, I'm like a mom and pop, and I'm building out my portfolio and buying condo units. Like, if your rents are not going up 10% a year, but they're going up, 1% a year,
Hmm.
you're probably going to pay less for that condo unit
Hmm.
as an investor, right? You're like, listen, like, I think people were willing, especially during the pandemic, right? People, mom and pops were willing to pay huge numbers because they're like, wait, like rents go up 10% a year.
Yeah, I know.
Everyone got used to this crazy number.
Yeah.
So I think like ultimately it's interesting though to see the funding model in Canada, or at least in the GTA in Vancouver. The funding model is going away from, hey, sell 60% of the building via pre-sale, to, hey, we're going to use CMHC and build rental apartment units, and that's what's going to be delivered over the next 4, 5, 6 years.
Yeah.
Actually, you've raised something that I want to call back a little bit. I help me with the last name, John. We spoke to a really insightful condo developer here
Oh,
in Canada, Puyan.
I forget his last name. Yes, from Devron
Puyan.
Developments. Yeah.
Puyan, we're so sorry, but Puyan's episode, look it up. It's on our channel. Was really interesting, and something that you just said, Steve, about the
Funding
percentage that you
model.
have to sell. Yeah, the funding. He just raised some really great points that Canada is really an outlier where our banks, and there's a historical reason why they were so conservative getting into this market. That when condos started to become a thing, because condos were, relatively newer, it exploded in
In
the
the
80s and
80s.
90s and 90s. Yeah. And what Canadian banks did, unlike a lot of other banks in the world, is require a lot of skin in the game. So you had to show
Pre-sell.
and pre-sell all these units at a really high rate before they would finance you. And he pointed out that's not the case. Like in other countries, even New York, you build the unit and then people see if that's something they want, and that changes the mix of product on the market.
Hmm.
So I just wondered if Steve, you've heard any of this talk out in Vancouver.
I mean, I haven't heard of the banks,
No, I should clarify that Puyan's finding that, um, to finish the thought, under the table, they're accepting a little bit of a lower, a percent
Hmm.
sold. They're negotiating, but by and large, he thinks until industry kind of really pushes for it, and makes a push for that amongst the
Hmm.
banks, that could be
I
something that could happen.
five large Canadian banks. I'm very skeptical that
Yeah.
they will change their ways. I mean, the way the Canadian banking system is set up today, even just like e-transfers and wires and, the oligopoly that it is, I just struggle to think that we're going to see a revelation in the way that new condos are financed. So, I think we're just stuck with to our early conversation is these developers, big developers, either go rental or John, maybe they get into multiplex at scale.
Well, yeah, I think. Well, they're gonna go rental. I think most of them. I mean, it's not. There's
Multiplex is
no.
obviously way too small
Yeah.
margins too.
It's
But
way too small for big builders. Yeah, and listen, there's no condo selling. We said this for at least probably like several years. I can't imagine the new condo market rebounding in the next 2 years. So, if you want to do something, they're probably just gonna. I mean, and it's not easy to convert to rental, but yeah, I suspect that that's what's probably gonna happen.
All right. Well, we're ending here a little shorter, but I
yeah,
think
unleash the foreign buyers.
Oh, buddy. I yeah, this is I mean, everyone's got their take on it. I mean, I think it's insane that we're kind of coming back full circle now. Like honestly, like I mean, how many years ago were we talking about foreign buyers, and every housing academic was like, "No, no, it's not a big thing. You guys are making a big deal out of it. It's not an issue. They don't need foreign buyers. Stop being racist." CMHC's president basically said we're all being racist. And then of course they kind of put the clamp on them. They banned them like several years ago. And now every freaking builder is like screaming and begging foreign buyers to come in. But it's
but but isn't
it's
Canada having a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde? Not Jekyll and Hyde, that's not the right term. Give me a better
Oh, and just to put
analogy.
context for anyone that
Yes.
doesn't understand what's going on. So
Yeah.
there was a letter that was signed by 26 of the largest developers in BC that
that's
was
right. I
sent
saw that.
to Prime Minister Mark Carney and the Premier David Eby in BC, basically saying remove the foreign buyer ban or restrictions on new units, allow foreign buyers not to buy resale product, but allow them to come in and buy pre-sale product to hit these construction financing targets so we can continue to build new housing and deliver it for the people of Canada. So I said, yeah, I mean, obviously it's rather ironic, but Urmi, can continue your thought there.
Well, it's interesting you say that because Australia did try that about 10 years
They
ago,
still
where
do it, I think.
They still
where
do it. I think so.
they ban it from resale, but tried
Correct.
to funnel it. And then they ended up in the same situation where they were building all these micro condos. And so the
Totally.
problem is it's the issue is that the investor market doesn't want to build the kind of homes that most people want to then occupy. Like once the idea is like beautiful, right? You get an investor, they purchase that new house or condo, they build it until you go up the job ladder and are able to afford it. But what they want and their returns while you're doing that is not the same as what you
Totally.
want to live in.
No.
But it is interesting. And I was just going to finish my point that Canada is running into this really funny moment where, you know, we went crazy on immigration to the point where it's totally uncontrolled, slam the door on that. And now even conservative Premier Doug Ford has been caught in a bit of a flip-flop here in Ontario because he was going to make it easier for temporary workers to get status and to allow their spouses to work because they're so desperate to get some of those workers back. So it's just an
We're all over the place in
absolute,
Canada.
it, we're really interesting on immigration in Canada.
Mhm.
And I'm being nice with the word interesting because I can't think of the word, but um, we're just lurching,
Yes.
side to side, basically.
Listen, the foreign buyer thing to me is ludicrous. Like at the end of the day, if the housing is so expensive that nobody in our own country can freaking afford it, then what are we building for? Like what the hell's well, like what is like I mean you need it, you should have a freaking system where the housing's actually affordable for the people who are gonna want to live in it and wanna, I mean
It's a
it
tough
sounds
it's a tough PR look.
for what? The foreign
The
buyers?
developer, I mean, for the developer to be like, hey, we care so much about the people, we need to build more housing, so let the
Well,
foreigners come.
buddy, it's not that tough because they have freaking economists like CMHC and Moffat basically saying, "Oh, they're going to build more supply. They're going to solve our housing crisis. They're build, build. This is all we need. It doesn't matter who freaking owns these things and what the prices are.
Wall
Give
Street,
me a
Bay Street,
break."
foreign buyers. What
Like,
surprises me, and I told John this last episode, is I'm looking outside, beautiful view of the Toronto skyline, so many cranes in the air. It's not as if we haven't done the investor thing.
mhm.
We literally did it. Like when we were saying that our friends that are in a condo building go to conferences, the number of units under construction, they're like, "What did you just say?" And they shock their colleagues in Miami, New York, big cities, right? The amount of construction that's happened in Toronto in the last
But when Americans
10
come here,
years.
they think we're screwed up. The way we build housing is completely backwards. The way we build like the way we build condos, like it's just foreign. I remember like when I tweeted about this, the Puyan's argument about, the financing of new housing construction, a prof at U of T, Kevin Bryan, who I kind of, know and been in touch with, he's American. He's like, when I came up here 15 years ago, he's like, I didn't understand what all these sales centers were. Like they were like new to me. I've never seen them in the US. All these pre-construction offices and these lineups of people. And he's like, I show up here. He's like, I don't get what's going on, right? Because that's not how they sell down there. So it's very, I mean, I don't know. I would say our model is kind of broken here. And I think that's my point. I mean, seriously, if it only works to need pre-sales and foreign buyers to buy them, then you need to change something. And maybe the change is change the freaking funding model and yeah, lower taxes and make it affordable for people who are actually going to own the units. But
But I
again, I
think
have,
what's happening is like I think there's a structural shift here with obviously I think that is correlated to monetary policy. We were in a decade of zero interest rate policy, which spurred all these people to funnel their money into pre-construction condos to generate any sort of yield, getting pushed out on the risk curve, so to speak. And I think we're now in an environment where it's shifted back from this like speculative investor market to an end user market. And so you look at the product, it's still selling today and there's still some demand. It's like, the entry level house, it's the relatively affordable 3-bedroom townhouse, it's the
mhm,
low rise wood frame apartment building. It's like all the stuff that like you can actually build for like the local demand market,
mhm,
the end user, the family. There seems to be like a decent uptake of that, and then all of the stuff that's just completely stagnating
mhm,
is all these micro suites in high rise towers. Yeah, $1,500, $1,600, $2,000 a square foot.
mhm,
So that's the funny thing. If that builder letter had not just said restrict them to new construction, not resale, but only to 3-bedroom condos and some of these bigger units, I wonder how many foreign buyers would still be interested. Uh,
100%.
Probably not. So, and just before we go, that's Puyan Safapur. Sorry, Puyan, we
Thank you.
loved your views. Check out that video. I think he's doing great work. He's lobbying for this in Toronto. And I think that's it.
That's
The
it.
sun is shining.
It is. And
What
this
are you
is
guys going to do on the weekend?
I'm heading up north.
Yeah, I know
Okay,
we're
no.
getting lost, literally.
No,
Open
in
house,
in
bull
nature.
market's back. Yeah, no, it should be good. Vancouver weather is only nice for a couple months of the year, so
Yeah, we're in it too, and we're loving it. I just love the feel of the sun. So everybody, hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks to John and Steve as always. Thanks to all of our listeners and viewers. Leave your comments. John is at X Twitter at John Pasalis. Steve is at Steve Saretsky. The show is at Move Smartly. And you can comment also on our YouTube channel and wherever else you're catching us from. So thanks, guys. We'll be back in a month.
Till next time.